it's all, a little bit odd, right? So there's so much more that needs to be done. But at the same time, there is so much there for it to be great. There's a lot of sort of, there used to be sort of one or two voices in that space. Crypto's great, XYZ. Crypto's bad, XYZ. Now there's 3 or 4 voices in the space, rather than just having right and wrong, and a different approach to it. And there are different shades to it now in terms of law and regulation. So it has taken that step forward. There's no doubt in my mind, though. We were talking about 10x earlier. Great example of 10x is Stake and YOLO. They are probably the perfect and prime examples of early adoption, creating a fantastic experience, which has really been, generated both internally and externally. So they're on that axis between technology, early adoption, and that whole thought and process, really, of making that fantastic experience for us all in the gaming space. And these guys have been the real beneficiaries of that. And they've been able to create and now build brands whereby they have the much higher transacting, customer or player, because again, they've built in then that trust. It's become far more ubiquitous for one of their customers to go and do something, which has created that boom for some of these, businesses that have been able to adopt it, that have been able to implement it. And then you've obviously had everybody else that's followed. Okay, great. I remember, Craig, I shouldn't say this, Tim's company was in my lead list in 2018 at Trustly.
I was going to ask you.
I didn't even contact them. Can I sell them Trustly? What? No. I didn't even reach out. Sorry, Nick. But, it was, there's been, those sorts of, changes that have taken place. And, it's, we probably need to get back on track now. But, the innovation of crypto for my money, there's a lot more to come. But we were talking about time. It takes forever.
Yeah. And what's holding back the crypto space for the most part, I suppose, is regulation. To some extent,
it's not regulation. Right? It there are plenty of things that are unregulated that work really well. Facebook. Most of the monopolies in the world that we know today are very lightly regulated. Something doesn't need to be regulated for everybody to understand it. And before everybody jumps on me and says, Jake, that sounds very, very high risk. You're dealing with other people's money. Trust has to first come from the industry itself. And unfortunately, there's been too many bad actors. But then there's also not been clear enough steps to sort of standardize amongst everybody else. In payment, where we have fantastic standardization of things, are really where you have monopolies at play. And there hasn't really been that monopolization effect that has taken place in crypto yet.
So you're saying that, for example, if you have a monopoly in a particular industry, they are the ones that set the standard.
They can set a standard,
just like
absolutely.
Apple, for example.
100%.
When Apple decides that USB-C is going to be the standard, or that NFC is going to be the standard, that's what happens, essentially. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely. Yeah? Well, in payment, it links back to sort of what I was saying earlier about trust. So Visa and MasterCard, I'm not going to say the M word because we're currently trying to work with MasterCard, so we've got to be pretty careful. But with these guys, they've obviously gone and spoken to all of the banks and said, hey, look, issue our card. You can do X, Y, and Z with it. And there had to be a coming together, really, of all of those financial institutions to be able to accept the card in order to put the payment in front of people. The in-country bank schemes, and we can take this, you can look at nearly any payment scheme, and the real popular, successful ones, Pix in Brazil, which is obviously, Brazil is big news at the moment with a new regulation there. Pix in Brazil has standardized basically a payment system with all of the banks via the central government. The standardization that you have in your home country in Sweden with Swish is the coming together of really 5 financial institutions, which are the major banks, and it's 99% of the bank population, whereas we don't have that in crypto. At the moment, we have exchanges here, we have exchanges there, we have licenses here, we have licenses there. You know, there hasn't necessarily been a coming together. Where there has been a coming together and where we are starting to now see progress, even though there are sort of 2 competing factions in sort of the stablecoin space, you know, USDT and certainly USDC have been able to, okay, great, let's base this on something that everybody understands, which is the US dollar. You know, it's the world's currency still. And then let's link that to, obviously, this blockchain technology. And, you know, let's guarantee then on those funds, you know, and charge a gas fee for it. So we are starting to see, you know, and those 2 primary options that I've just mentioned, if you actually look at traded volume, something that's not being done, you know, artificially, actual in the real world, transactions taking place, those are the 2 ones that are succeeding. Those are the 2 ones that people are actually using to pay each other. Those are the actual currencies that people are using. Because they've said, okay, cool, we need to standardize this. We need to have this based on a technology, and it needs to be something that everybody understands, which is obviously the US dollar. So we're starting to see that. But if you go across any payment, if you're sort of missing that coming together, it's very hard to get things done.
So to wrap up the kind of space of crypto, where do you see the space in, let's say, a couple of years' time, as it pertains to real world use? Do you think that fiat is still where most people will live, so to say, or does this need to happen that the major players within the crypto space need to come together for us to be more comfortable moving our monetary values, let's say, more into the crypto space and actually start to do commerce within that space?
Yeah, I'm pretty optimistic, pretty bullish on the overall sentiment of it moving forward. Versus fiat. Yeah, versus fiat, we haven't addressed the other monopoly in the room, which is, you know, the respective governments of the world, right, who own a monopoly on their system to charge taxes and everything else that they provide. And with a scenario versus fiat, I think you will probably still see fiat. However, what you will have is really, you know, that coupling together with fiat, you know, in the case of the stablecoin. You know, I'm sure at some stage there will be something that can become ubiquitous. You know, there's been a lot of people out there that have tried to link cryptocurrency, as an example, to gold, which is obviously a physical, known asset, been trusted for thousands of years for its qualities of, you know, perceived value, wealth, great conductor of electricity, it looks great. You know, all of these different things as to why we value it. So I think there will be still that coupling together with fiat, but it's going to go alongside the blockchain. So the Web3, Web4 guys, etc. You know, don't worry, it is taking place. It is happening. I think it's going to move a lot faster probably than it has done in the last 5 years. You'll probably see more change in this space over the next 1 to 2 years than you have done over the last 5 years. You know,
I'm a big fan of Ray Dalio. I don't know if you read the Bridgepoint Principles, and he has a couple of other books that are just absolutely amazing. But in one of his books that's called The Changing World Order, he encourages people to take a helicopter view of the world, and we are used to thinking about the world in kind of 10-year cycles and boom and bust cycles of the economy. But Ray Dalio says we should zoom out even further and think about the 100-year cycle. And what he talks about is, like, in our lifetime, we've never experienced the falling of an empire, for example. Like the Second World War was the kind of outcome of that was that we moved from the British Empire into the American Empire, and the world as we know it today is based on the American Empire that basically started from the Second World War.